Okay, good Moyed, everybody. Thank you so much for joining me. It is traditional that on Yom Tov, Chol HaMoed, memories from my childhood, that one learns Torah, one tries. That on Yom Tov, any time that we have, of course, we spend serious time, especially this Yom Tov, time with our family, but also time with the Rabbeinu Shalom, which is not only, of course, in davening, but also learning. And Pesach is certainly a Yom Tov where there is plenty of Torah. So tonight we're going to look at a small aspect of Torah, of halacha, and perhaps give us a little bit of analysis. So this will be somewhat, as we say in the vernacular, yeshivish, somewhat lomdish. So our starting point is we're going to talk about a halacha in the mitzvah of sfirat. Okay? So we've all started counting the Omer, no doubt. And the halacha is that one counts the Omer at night. We count the Omer, and it's interesting in the Lashon of the Rambam, it's mitchilas halayla, which is really maybe a subtopic. According to some, perhaps it's not even necessarily even a din in night as such, and this might even help us for what we want to discuss this evening. But it's mitchilas halayla. Now the question is, what is the earliest point in time that can halachically be deemed to be night, and therefore one can start counting sfiras ha'omer? Now, before we go any further, I think it's worthwhile saying that according to the vast majority of poskim, and that seems to be the accepted normative halacha, that sfiras ha'omer today is midrabanan and not min haTorah. The authority for the mitzvah, the chi of the obligation for the mitzvah is rabbinic, it's midrabanan, and it's not min haTorah, with a few notable exceptions, but that is the way that we certainly halacha treats it. Bearing that in mind, I would like to share with you a Tosfos in Menachos, in the sugya of sfiras ha'omer, and a Rosh, a Shulchan Aruch, upon which we're going to ask some very basic and very obvious questions. So the Tosfos is in Menachos Daf Samach Vav Amud Aleph, and I'll read to you. It's a long Tosfos, but I'm going to read you out. We only need 2 lines. Says Tosfos, Nira, says Tosfos. And this actually is referring to the piece of Gemara where the Gemara has established that sfiras ha'omer today is Zecher LeMikdash. It is to something, a reminder of a practice that we did Bisman HaMikdash. I.e., it is probably the way to learn it is that it is midrabanan. Says Tosfos, Nira, it would appear, de besofik chashecha yochel levorech. Says Tosfos, it would thus appear, because this mitzvah is midrabanan, it would appear that in a period of time which is doubtful as to whether it is night or not, the so-called Twilight Zone in the title, known, of course, to the cognoscenti as Bein Hashmoshos. It is the period which is after Shkia, but not yet Seis HaKochavim. Now, what is Bein Hashmoshos? Those of you that have been doing Daf Hayomi, Shabbos, Daf Lamed Daled, Daf Lamed Hey, you will know more than I do. But be that as it may, whatever that is, and there's a massive machlokes, but assuming that we have a time which is Sofik Chashecha, it is doubtful whether it is night or not. It may be day, it may be night. And we have no way halachically of determining whether it is either. So, if I were to ask you, can you say sfiras ha'omer? Can you bench Omer? Can you say sfiras ha'omer in that time? I'm sure you would say to me, no, you have to wait. Says Tosfos, Nira de besofik chashecha yochel levorech. Says Tosfos, in a time which is sofik chashecha, you can say sfiras ha'omer. Ve'ein tzorich lahamtin ad shehei vadai laila. Says Tosfos, you don't need to wait until it is vadai laila. Why? So, in other words, Tosfos is clearly accepting that this is not laila, it's bein hashmoshes, it's sofik chashecha, but that's fine, no problem. Lechatchila. initially, you may go ahead and count the Omer bein hashmoshes. Why? Kiven shehu sfeika d'Rabbanan. Says Tosfos, because it's a doubt in a d'Rabbanan. And you and I know that the rule is that when you have a doubt in something which is min ha-Torah l'chumra, you have to be strict. Whereas sfeika d'Rabbanan lekula, a doubt in something which is quote unquote merely rabbinic in origin, in obligation, you can go lekula. That's all we need for our purposes. That's Tosfos. And the Rosh says, the Rosh paskins this as well. Notice Tosfos said, and here it's true that it's interesting. Sfiras ha'omer is an interesting mitzvah. Tosfos says that you can yochel levorich, that in bein hashmoshes you can be mevorich. Does Tosfos mean you can say the Sfiras ha'omer and make the bracha, or does he mean the counting of the Omer? Probably means that he says yochel levorich, you can make a bracha. The Rosh says very clearly you can make a bracha. Let's read the Shulchan Aruch. Before I do that, I should point out that the Ran, Rabbeinu Nissim, argues, and he says, how can you do this? Let's see if I can find the exact lashon. Ve'ein ze nochoin, the Ran in the end of Psochim, which is where he discusses that laws of Sfiras ha'omer. He says, ve'ein ze nochoin sheyachnis atzmoi besofek lechatchila. Surely that is incorrect. He argues with Tosfos and the Rosh. How can you initially, lechatchila, rely on a time which is inherently doubtful? It may be day, it may be night. Wait 10 minutes. Wait 15 minutes. What right do you have? Lechatchila. Somebody calls me up a shaila. Rabbi Roberts, it's bein hashmoshes. May I read Sfiras ha'omer now? I would, according to the Rosh and Tosfos, I would say, yeah, no problem, go ahead. Now hold on a second. It might be day. You might not be able to. It may be day. We don't know. No problem, says Tosfos, says the Rosh. Go ahead. It's a suffix, it's a doubt. What a strange use of the concept of suffix d'Rabbanan. I always understood that suffix d'Rabbanan means, well, it can mean a number of things, and I don't want to run ahead of myself here, that when you're in a situation which is b'di'evet, it's less than ideal. And I want to know, may I eat this? May I not eat this? If it's a d'Rabbanan and there's a doubt, you can go ahead, you can eat it, let's say. But l'chatchila, to put yourself in a situation, and nowhere does Tosfos say, oh, we're talking about somebody who's, I don't know, he's just about to go into the operating theater, or he's getting on a plane, and no, the guy wants to know, can you, l'chatchila, can you read, can you say Sfiras ha'omer bein hashmoshes? Says Tosfos, says the Rosh, no problem, and you can make a bracha. And we're going to look at these two things hopefully separately. Says the Ran, no way. Ein ze min hanochen, it is incorrect. It cannot be correct that we allow somebody, lechatchila, to do something which is doubtful. He may not be able to, it may not be valid, but we say lechatchila, go ahead and do it. To put yourself into that situation, lechatchila, just because it is a d'Rabbanan, cannot be correct. That's the machlokes rishonim. Let's read the Shulchan Aruch. The Shulchan Aruch is in Siman Tov Peites, Seif Base. And the Shulchan Aruch is actually talking about a scenario where they made a mistake in the day because it was cloudy. They made a bracha and then they realized that it was already day. Says the Shulchan Aruch, v'hamadaktakim. Very interesting language. Hamadaktakim, the frumas. People are really medaktik in mitzvahs, very careful, very particular. Hamadaktakim, einom soifrim ad seisakichavim. If you are, here's a litmus test. Are you a medaktik? Are you a mahadrin? Are you a fruma? I don't know. What word do you want to use? A medaktikin, those who are careful and particular in mitzvahs, einom soifrim ad seisakichavim. They don't count when it's suffix chashecha, when it is bein hashmoshes. They wait until it's seisakichavim, until it's night. V'chein ro'oi la'asais. Says the Shulchan Aruch. That's the right way to do things. That's the appropriate way to do things. You should really be like the medaktikim. What do you pick up from this Shulchan Aruch? It's very obvious. Who does he paskin like? Tosfos and the Rosh or the Ran? Very clear. And says the Mishnah Berurah. Clearly the Shulchan Aruch holds that the halacha is like Tosfos and the Rosh. that you are able, lechatchila, to count Sfiras HaOmer in Bein HaShmoshes, a period of time which is very possibly not night. You can go ahead and do it. But it's a good idea to be a frumah, hamadaktikim. It's appropriate, it's good, not obligatory, you don't have to. Says the Mishnah Berurah. I'll quickly read the Mishnah Berurah, although I've given you the gist of it. Min hadin, you could be makel to read Sfiras HaOmer from Af Kodem Tzeis HaKochavim. He says the words Mishatechshach, but he means clearly in Bein HaShmoshes, when it is dark, but it isn't night. Why? The Bein HaShmoshes Sofik Laila v'Ozlinon Lekula b'Sofik Derabanan Bizman Hazeh. And given that we are of the opinion that Sfiras HaOmer nowadays is Derabanan, according to most opinions, therefore you can be makel. Elodami Kol Mokoim. That's the exact language of the Ran. That's where the Mishnah Berurah gets it from, but it's not a good idea. And therefore, medaktikim, wait till Tzeis HaKochavim. And then he adds in the next Mishnah Berurah, but of course, if you weren't a medaktik and you said Sfiras HaOmer and you made a bracha, then absolutely you're yotza. There are two things we need to think about here, surely. One is the Sfiras HaOmer itself, the license, the permission, lechatchila, to this. Is this not a new interpretation of the concept of Sofik Derabanan Lekula, to allow you lechatchila to say Sfiras HaOmer Bein HaShmoshes? That's point number one we need to look into. And time allowing, there is a separate issue which we have to look into. Even if you're somehow able to demonstrate why it should be okay in the first instance, lechatchila, to do Sfiras HaOmer in Bein HaShmoshes, but does that mean that you therefore should be able to make a bracha? They don't necessarily follow, as I shall demonstrate. Not in every scenario where there is a sofek and you are able to do a mitzvah misofek, do you automatically say that you should do a bracha? Because remember, doing a bracha, if you are not obligated to say a bracha, and you say a bracha, especially as we're talking about a mitzvah, let's leave aside for a moment Birchas Hanenin, that's a Rashba, that's a separate discussion. But Birchas HaMitzvahs, maybe I'm not obligated, or rather, maybe I'm not able to do mitzvah now. Maybe it's day. So it might be one thing to allow me to say Hayoim X days la'omer and biyotza, but in a period which is at the end of the day is doubt, that I should be able and obligated to say a bracha and risk saying Hashem's name in vain, which is a big issa. Not so simple, as we shall see. So let's begin to delve. These are the two issues we want to look into. Let's delve into this just a little bit. And we want to use, first of all, a very beautiful idea from the Stipler, in Kehilas Yaakov in Brochas Simon Hay. But I'm going to give it a bit of a background, a bit of a context. And I want to discuss another halacha. And there are many that one could bring to bear. I'm just going to use a small sample. There's a halacha in Shulchan Aruch in Erachaim Simon Yud. What would be if you have a garment that is, half of it is open and half of it is closed? Without even going into the technicality, I have a garment that may or may not be obligated in tzitzis. So the halacha is chayev b'tzitzis misafek. The halacha is I do have to put tzitzis on it in case it is considered to be a regular four-cornered garment which requires tzitzis, and therefore you have to put tzitzis on it. Here's a shaila for you, however. What would be if I live in Berlin and there is not yet an Erev, and therefore you're only allowed to go out on Shabbos with something which is either a malbush or a tachshit, something which is a garment. If this is not chayev b'tzitzis, and I've gone and put tzitzis on it, then that's just rubbish. I don't know what that is. And therefore, would I be allowed to walk out into a Rishus Harabim with this on Shabbos, even though I have an obligation because of a doubt to put tzitzis on it? But would that entitle me to wear such a garment in the Rishus Harabim? Says the Shulchan Aruch, no. Says the Shulchan Aruch, you have to put tzitzis on it, because maybe you have to. Maybe it's obligated. But ein yotzim bo b'Shabbos, because maybe you're carrying. That's carrying. Says the Mogen Avram, Says the Magen Avraham that when the Shulchan Aruch says that you may not go out in the street with it on Shabbos, he doesn't just mean to go out into a domain which is a Reshus Harabim, a public domain, which would mean that you had transgressed a biblical commandment of carrying on Shabbos. Who had in? The exact same halacha would apply, says the Magen Avraham. You wouldn't be able to go into a Carmelis, a domain which is neither Reshus Harabim nor Reshus HaYochid, where the Isser to carry in it is only midrabanan. Why, says the Magen Avraham? Safek Drabanan is Lekula. Says the Magen Avraham, it's true, Safek Drabanan is Lekula, but that does not give you license, lechatchila, to do something which might be forbidden, midrabanan. You don't say Safek Drabanan lechatchila, Safek Drabanan Lekula, lechatchila. Ideally, you only say it, you only invoke this rule of Safek Drabanan Lekula in a post facto, in a less than ideal, in a b'diavad situation. And similarly, by the way, we find the opinion of the Taz elsewhere. The Taz is in Siman Ayin Aleph, where it's discussing somebody who has, somebody's passed away. There are people who could look after Yesh Lo Kovrin. There are people who are able to look after the mace and make sure that it gets buried. And therefore, there is some doubt as to whether the relative does have the din of an oinain or not. Nevertheless, says the Taz, the oinain is not allowed to be machmir to read Kriya Shema. Why? Because he might be doing an issa, safek drabanan lekula, but you can't be mekel lechatchila. Similar sort of idea, without going into the technicality. Says the Pri Megadim, there in Orach Chaim Siman Yud, when it's talking about tzitzis, he says, whoa, slow down. He says, interesting, Magen Avraham, what have you done? You have introduced a new idea. You have just said that when the Shulchan Aruch says that you may not carry this beged into a Reshus Harabim on Shabbos, you equally may not carry it into a Carmelis, where the Isser is only midrabanan. Why? Because you can't say Safek Drabanan Lekula lechatchila, initially and ideally, to be lenient. He says that's not so simple. That, says the Pri Megadim, is a machloikas, Tosfos, and the Ran. Our machloikas. Not so simple. So we see some reservation about this. And there are other sources, there are other cases which we could bring, but I don't want to belabor the point too much. And therefore it seems that it's perhaps a little bit unclear. When do we say Safek Drabanan Lekula, when don't we? And that indeed is a massive discussion. How far does it go? We have a Machlokes Rishonim, we have a Machlokes Tosfos and the Rosh against the Ran. We have a Magen Avraham and a Taz that seem to side with the Ran, a stricter opinion. On that, the Pri Megadim says not so simple. And we really need to ask ourselves the following question. A very simple question. Do we not have now potentially a contradiction in the Shulchan Aruch? The Shulchan Aruch from Orach Chaim Siman Yud, assuming the Magen Avraham is right, and this is the way the Magen Avraham understood the Shulchan Aruch, that you can't go out into a Carmelis, a domain which is rabbinic in origin, with a beged which is may or may not be chayev b'tzitzis. You might be carrying midrabanan, you might not. Says the Pri Megadim, he learns pshat in the Shulchan Aruch, you're not allowed to go out. How do we square that with the Shulchan Aruch that we've learned, our Shulchan Aruch, in Hilchas Sfiras Ha'omer, that you can lechatchila. Lechatchila, you can count Sfiras Ha'omer in a time that's doubtful. How do we understand this? So the Stipler, Zechronu Livrocha, says a very beautiful idea. Let's try and keep it, it's really quite simple. He says, we have perhaps confused or conflated two different aspects of D'Rabbanan. There is a mitzvah midrabanan, and there is an isur D'Rabbanan. There is an obligation to do things midrabanan, and sometimes there are things which are forbidden to be done midrabanan. A mitzvah and an isur. A mitzvah is an obligation. An isur is something which is prohibited. Now, we could begin to analyze this and look at this in the following way. It's not at all clear. Not everybody would agree with this. There is a famous opinion of the Nesivos that seems to hold not like this, and that is a separate topic. Here's a question for you. When the Torah says, you, I, midorabonon, we have to listen to the Chachamim, okay, which is a whole separate topic. The Psukim say in the Torah very clearly, you have to do what they tell you, and you must not deviate, you may not argue. In fact, so much so that the question is asked, does that not therefore mean that every thing which is rabbinic in origin is actually really biblical in origin? And in some respects it is. Either way, let me, in case you haven't come across this idea before, and please forgive me if I'm assuming too much or too little. I don't even know who's participating this year. I haven't clicked on really to see yet. So again, please forgive me. I don't want to insult anybody's intelligence, but I don't want to miss out things which might not be obvious either. So one of the things to think about whenever we talk about obligations and indeed prohibitions is to always identify and analyze the locus of obligation, or the focus of obligation or of prohibition. I'll explain to you what I mean. In the Gemara discusses this idea in the beginning of Nedarim, and the language that is used is Gavra and Chefza. Gavra means the person, Gever, Amichen mitzadei Gover. Gavra is a person. Chefza is just the Aramaic. It's a bit like Italian. We just seem to stick aleph at the end of everything. Yes? Chefza, which just means an object. So is an obligation or a prohibition person-centered, androcentric? Or is it object-centered? And it makes it makes a lot of differences. So here's a question. When the rabbis say, let's take an example. I'm just going to pluck an example out of the air. Cholov akum, cholov stam. Leaving aside what is, what doesn't count nowadays for cholov stam. Leaving all that aside. Something which is cholov stam, according to all opinions. Milk, right? Which is, or it could be stam yenom, wine which has been touched by a Gentile. It's also midrabanan, okay? Midrabanan, rabbinic. Does that mean I am not allowed to drink that? Or does it mean it is forbidden? Where is the focus? Now, this may sound like I'm splitting hairs. Oh boy, I am not. It's not about splitting hairs at all. It can make all the difference in the world. And we're going to see that a little bit tonight. Okay? So, I hope that's clear so far. There is, in classic yeshivish terminology, it is gavra and chefza, person and object. And it can make very, very big differences when we are analyzing. And this is something you always need to ask yourself when you come across any halacha. It could be positive, it could be negative, an obligation or a prohibition. Always ask that question, and it can make a very big difference. Let's turn our attention now to something which is forbidden midrabanan. Like I said, you can take the example of wine, it can be cholov, it doesn't matter. I have in front of me now some wine, and there is a very real doubt as to whether this wine is yayin stam yenom. Is this wine, you can conjure up some scenario, it doesn't matter. Is this or is this not stam yenom? I have no way of clarifying. It may well be. There is good reason to doubt that it may be. So I'm holding here in my hand an item which may be also, right? Now, if I go ahead and drink it, what do you suggest? I know I've muted all your mics, but would it be logical to assume, oh well, sofek Drabbanon Lakula, and therefore I should be allowed, ideally, initially, just to go ahead and drink it? Does that make sense to you? I don't think so. Not at all. Because if I go ahead, let's say I get it wrong, meaning that I go ahead and I drink it, and it turns out actually it was stam yenom. Have I drunk something which is intrinsically forbidden? Yes, absolutely. If this is stam yenom, it is forbidden. Now this is something which is doubtful to be forbidden. So therefore, does it make any sense to say that I have here, I have something which is sofik stam yenom? Does it make sense to say, oh, sofik drabonon, you're allowed to be lenient in a sofik drabonon, go ahead and just drink it? That makes no sense. Certainly not. And then there, in those scenarios, it would make sense to say that we apply the rule that something which is rabbinic in origin is lekula, you can be makel, only, of course, in a post facto situation. Retrospective, I look back on it, b'diavad, it was done. Or possibly when I find myself in a very difficult situation where I need lechatchila to rely on a b'diavad. That's known in halacha as a shas hadchak, in extremis, where I'm allowed initially under certain circumstances to rely on a less than ideal perspective. But just to give carte blanche to anything which may well be intrinsically forbidden rabbinically, and to say, oh, just go ahead and eat it and drink it and do this which is forbidden, makes no sense whatsoever. Of course not. There, suggests the stipler, the Ran is perfectly correct. It makes perfectly sense. And he brings various proofs. We have, for example, in the Gemara beginning of Beitza, by a Dover Sheyesh Lo Matirin, there's a concept of Dover Sheyesh Lo Matirin where we invoke the following logic and we say, Ad she'tochlenu be'isa, tochlenu beheta. Instead of eating something that is forbidden, eat it when it's permitted. What logic would there be just to say, oh, just go ahead blithely and just eat it? However, that's only, says the stipler, when we are referring to Issa, something that is forbidden. But when we are talking about a mitzvah, an obligation, let's come now to Sfiras Omer. That's an obligation. It's not an Issa. It's not something which is forbidden. It's an obligation. My question is, when I find myself every evening in this period of halachic doubt, halachic twilight, what is the question? Is the question, is there an item here which I maybe can eat or can't eat that is or isn't intrinsically prohibited? That's not the question. The question is me. Me, the Jew. Do I, the Gavra, do I, at this moment in time, have an obligation to read, so I'm going to say read because I want to talk about Megillah, maybe. Do I have an obligation to count Sfiras Omer? And the answer is, maybe. I don't know. You might have. You might well have. It could be night. We don't know. It could be night. There's nothing Osir over here. There's no Issa. The question is, what is my status? Am I, at this moment in time, in this halachic twilight, am I obligated to read the Sfiras Omer or not? And what is the answer? I don't know. You might be. Could be. Possibly. And therefore, if we apply the rule, says Tosfos and the Rosh, Sofek D'Rabbanan, a doubt in an obligation of a D'Rabbanan, you're entitled to take the lenient view even when there's a doubt. In which case, for the purposes of Sfiras Omer, I'm entitled to say it's night. If it's night, I can count. And not only can I count, I can make a bracha. Because it's a perfectly valid Sfiras Omer. I'll say that again. When we're talking about something which is prohibited, which, by the way, explains the question in the Shulchan Aruch. The Shulchan Aruch in Orach Chaim Siman Yud is discussing what? Am I allowed to go out in the street in a Drabonon domain on Shabbos with a beged that may or may not be obligated in tzitzis? Now, I have to put tzitzis on it generally because maybe it needs tzitzis. So what am I doing? I'm walking out into a domain on Shabbos, a rabbinic domain, but a domain, and I may be doing something which is prohibited. Because it could be that this Beged is not chayav b'tzitzis. I put tzitzis on it, and therefore when I walk out, I'm carrying something, because it's unnecessary. I'm carrying something. So to say that lechatchila you should be allowed to go and do something which is prohibited would be as nonsensical, says the Pri Megadim, says the Magen Avraham, would be as nonsensical as taking some food which may be also midrabanan and telling me, oh, it's okay, just go ahead and drink it. It's not a problem. Lechatchila. And that's why the Magen Avraham wouldn't agree with the Pri Megadim. The Pri Megadim compares, he connects to our case of Sfiras HaOmer, but says the Stipler, that's not a valid connection. They're talking about two totally different things. Our halacha, the halacha that we're discussing tonight, is a question of mitzvah. It's a question of chiyuv. It's a question of obligation. And there, Tosfos and the Rosh, and indeed the Shulchan Aruch paskins, that because when it comes every night to twilight, there is a doubt, maybe it is night, and therefore I am currently obligated, then the halacha of Safek D'Rabbanan Lekula means I'm entitled to take the lenient view, which means I'm entitled to deem it as night, in which case I'm obligated. So I'm allowed to say Sfiras HaOmer now, and I can make a bracha. But that's no connection to the case of the Shulchan Aruch in Orach Chaim, which is talking about something which is forbidden. That, in a nutshell, is the Stipler's resolution, which is very elegant, very beautiful. But let's take this a little bit. I think we still have a few minutes with you if you crave your indulgence. Let's take it a little bit further, because we've really possibly addressed the first issue, which is the issue of Sfiras HaOmer. But what about bracha? Now, the truth is, I probably pretty much answered it, but it's a little bit more subtle than that. Let's have a look at the following. I'll draw your attention to a halacha as follows. Halacha in Orach Chaim Siman Samach Zayin, where the halacha is that what would be if you have a suffix, a doubt, in something which is a doiraisa, such as lulav, for example. So without going into whatever the detail is, but let's say there's a doubt in whether or not I'm obligated to do this mitzvah. Let's talk about lulav, something which is min haTorah. So we say safek doiraisa lechumra. So I would be obligated in a situation of doubt to shake lulav. Says the Mishnah Brura in Siman Samach Zayin, but would you make a bracha? No, you wouldn't. Because even though we could have a scenario where there is out of a doubt, I'm doubtful as to whether I'm obligated to do this mitzvah min haTorah, we're talking about a biblical mitzvah such as lulav, and therefore the halacha would dictate, because of the doubt, you have to be machmir, because it's a doubt in a min haTorah, in a doiraisa, and you have to go ahead and do the mitzvah, Sfeika l'chumra, but that's only so far as the mitzvah itself is concerned. However, according to the bracha, as far as the bracha is concerned, the bracha on lulav is a drabanan. The bracha on lulav is only drabanan, and safek drabanan lekula, and therefore therefore don't make the bracha. And here we have a classic halachic. Please forgive me for using the word, but it's the right word. A bifurcation, where we have the ability to look at something and analyze it and deconstruct it and say, even though min haTorah, I'm obligated to shake lulav in this scenario, but the bracha element of it, the bracha is midrabanan, and to that I would apply the rule. I have to look at it and say, you can't make a bracha. Safek d'Rabbanan lekula, we won't allow you to make a bracha because maybe you're not obligated, and therefore you would end up making a bracha levatala. Now that's even though I have to shake the lulav, because safek d'oraisa lechumra. So it's a fascinating. That is the halacha, and the Chochmas Shleima, the Maharshal, asks on this from our case, where you have a scenario where you are allowed to do Sfiras HaOmer bein hashmashos, and yet here we say you do make a bracha. What's the difference? The truth is there are two other cases. There are two other scenarios where we find by a suffix that you do make a bracha, even though it's a suffix d'Rabbanan. One is, again, if you've been doing Daf Hayomi, you will have come across it recently. I think it was Daf Lamed Daled, Eruvei Chatzeros bein hashmoshes. Yes, if you to put down a type of eruv which is midrabanon, you are allowed to do it bein hashmoshes, right? And says the Mishnah Berurah, you can do this even lechatchila, and you can make a bracha. So there is a case like Sfirat where you are allowed to do this midrabanon in the bein hashmoshes and to make a bracha. That's one example, and the other example is Natilas Yadayim, and this is a bit more complicated. Water which is a suffix, whether it's good water for Natilas Yadayim or not. The Bir Halacha brings a Prima Godim that says even though that you can make a bracha on them, because seeing as you're allowed midrabanan to use these waters, even though there's some doubt as to whether they are valid or not, you can also make a bracha on them. The Chazon Ish argues on that and says it isn't a valid comparison to Eruvei Chatzeros, but let's try and understand this with the following simple idea. When we say, just to sharpen the definition of Safek Drabanan Lechatchila a little bit more, very much on the lines of what we're saying before, but maybe slightly differently, and a chiddush will emerge from this, hopefully. And that is as follows. When we say this rule, Safek Drabanan Lekula, that a doubt in a Drabanan, one is entitled to be lenient, this actually incorporates two ideas. Number one, it means that I don't need to be, wherever I'm going to invoke this rule, it means that I don't need to be concerned about the possibility of prohibition or of obligation in this matter. And furthermore, and this is the chiddush, it's not my chiddush, I wish it was, saw it in a sefer. Furthermore, Safek Drabanan Lekula tells me that there is a psak, that we resolve the doubt in the Drabanan. So, for example, in a situation where you have a person, similar to what the Stipler said, it's just a little bit more subtle, similar to what the Stipler said, in a situation where you have a person that has a vadai chiyuv, he himself has a vadai chiyuv, he has a definite obligation to do something, then I'm entitled to say that Safek Drabanan Lekula tells me that he is able to discharge his definite obligation using the mechanism of Safek Drabanan Lekula. So I was somebody that had upon me a definite obligation, and using the rule of Safek Drabanan Lekula, I am entitled to say that doing whatever it is, invoking the rule of Safek Drabanan Lekula, it tells me definitively that I am no longer obligated. That definite obligation that I had prior has gone via the mechanism of Safek Drabanan Lekula. And therefore, not only can I count Sfiras bein hashmoshes, but I can make a bracha, because this is definitely, using the rule of Safek Drabanan Lekula, it entitles me to say that it's night. It entitles me to say that it is night, and therefore this will enable me to discharge my definite obligation to count the Omer, and therefore, of course, I can go ahead and I can make a bracha. Now, this has an interesting corollary. This can go a little bit further. In other words, we're applying this, it's slightly more subtle than the Stipler. We're applying this in a situation where a person has a definite obligation, such as Sfirat Ha'omer. And then I do an action which, using the rule of Safek Drabanan Lekula, entitles me to discharge my definite obligation. Okay? Now, why is this subtlety relevant? Here's the following. Listen to the following. The Mishnah Berurah paskins when it comes to Kriyas HaMegillah. What would be if and here you're going to see so clearly how all this technical hair splitting can actually make a very real difference. It's very important always to remember, we don't just split hairs for the sake of it. It's not just because we're bored. We're trying to drill down and deconstruct and really strip away all the elements of a halacha to get down to its bare bones, its fundamental concept. because that entitles us to understand it and to know when to apply it and when not to apply it. And here is a classic example coming up. The Mishnah Berurah paskins in Tofresh Pei Zayin Sif Cotton A that what would be if somebody, for whatever reason, did not read Megillah the entire day of Purim, and now it is Bein Hashmoshes. Purim is exiting. It is now in a period of twilight, halachic twilight. Do you read the Megillah or don't you read the Megillah? What would you say? You read the Megillah. What about a bracha? What about a bracha? And this is where everything that we've said is going to be relevant. Says the Mishnah Berurah, no bracha. No bracha. You can't say a bracha. Says the Shar HaTzion, which is the footnotes of the Mishnah Berurah himself, and he refers us to Siman Samach Zayin, which is the case of which I mentioned before, which is the case of where the Mishnah Berurah says that when you have a suffix in lulav, for example. So even though min ha-suffix you have to shake lulav, but you don't make a bracha. The Mishnah Berurah compares it to that. Hold on a second. How does that work? How does that work with Sfirat? Why should that be? But if we've understood what we've said until now, and especially with that added subtlety of somebody who has a definite obligation. Again, I'll say the formula, because now you're going to see how it's going to make a difference. Somebody who has a vadai chiyuv, somebody who has a definite obligation to do a mitzvah, is entitled to utilize the rule of Sofek D'Rabbanan Lekula to enable him to discharge that obligation definitively, and therefore can make a bracha on it. What about this scenario? It's coming to the end of Purim. We're going to have to differentiate between somebody who is just about to enter a day of a chiyuv of Sfiras Ha'omer, and here I'm giving the game away, or somebody who is about to enter a day where there is no obligation. So it is true, if we were to look at these two people, the fellow who is about to enter the day of Sfiras Ha'omer is a day where there is a chiyuv. Has that chiyuv started yet or not? Is he mechuyev? He may be, he may not be. But there is a vadai chiyuv coming. I'm entitled to say, Sofek D'Rabbanan Lekula, and therefore it is night, and therefore I can discharge already my definite obligation to read the Omer, to say that, to make Sfiras Ha'omer, and therefore I can make a bracha as well. But this guy at the end of Purim, what is the doubt? The doubt is that maybe he's not obligated at all. Maybe this is already the next day, in which case there is no vadai chiyuv. He doesn't have a vadai chiyuv. On Purim he had a vadai chiyuv. It might not be Purim. And therefore, says the Mishnah Berurah, so we're going to have to obligate him to read Megillah in case it is still Purim, but we cannot make him make a bracha. Because only when we're dealing with somebody that has a definite chiyuv. And the question is whether you're going to use Sofek D'Rabbanan Lekula to enable him to discharge that vadai chiyuv. But this is somebody who may not have a chiyuv at all. He may not have a chiyuv. He may never have a chiyuv. This Purim is gone. But if that is right, if this analysis is right, then a chiddush would emerge. The following chiddush would emerge. That when the Mishnah Berurah says that bein hashmoshes on Purim, he is mechuyev to read the Megillah, but he can't make a bracha, what would be the other way round? What would be the other way round? What would be bein hashmoshes as Purim enters? So let me tell you what the Mishnah Berurah paskins, Tofresh Tzadi Beis, Sifkotten Yudalad from the Pri Megadim. The Pri Megadim paskins that b'di'eved in a shas hadchak, in a difficult situation, were you to read the Megillah in bein hashmoshes before Purim enters, you're yotza. Midin, Sofek D'Rabbanan Lekula. If that is the case, then perhaps one could say that in that scenario, you would be able to make the bracha. If you're entitled to use Sofik D'Rabbanan Lekula to enable you to discharge your obligation, to say that it's Purim, to be koveya that it is Vadai Laila, that it's Laila as far as your chiyuv is concerned, and therefore you are Vadai Mechuyev, then it would seem that you should be able to make a bracha then. I haven't seen that anywhere, but that's a chiddush. That might be a chiddush. And one last point. I see somebody wrote me a ha'ara here. I'll see if I get a chance to read it in a second. Thank you. That's great. And one last point, and that would be a woman and with sfiras ha'omer. So the halacha is that women are not obligated. It's a mitzvah saseh shazman groma, pashtus, unless you hold it like the Ramban in Kiddushin. But we seem to paskin that it is a time-bound mitzvah, and therefore they are not obligated. However, Ashkenazi women, like the Ramah, can, like any mitzvah saseh shazman groma, they can make a bracha. What would be if a woman wanted to make a bracha in bein hashmashos? So it would follow from our analysis she wouldn't be able to. She might be able to say a bracha. She might be able to count sfiras ha'omer, but she's not coming from a place of a chiyuv. If she's not coming at it from a place of a chiyuv, a man who is mechuyev, who's obligated in sfiras ha'omer, he wants to discharge his obligation using the concept of Sofik D'Rabbanan Lekula. You could say he's mechuyev, and therefore there is a hachra'ah, there is a psak that you're entitled to say using the concept of Sofik D'Rabbanan Lekula, that it is already night, and therefore he can make a bracha. But for a woman who doesn't have a chiyuv, then to be able to use Sofik D'Rabbanan Lekula to say that she should be able to make a bracha, I think that would be a big chiddush. We could take this a little bit further. It seems to be possibly a machlokas between the Chacham Tzvi and the Chaye Odom in this concept of making a bracha by Eruv Chatzeris. I just want to see if I can quickly bring up this comment that was asked of me. Bear with me a second. See if I know how to do this. Chat 1, here we go. Here was the question. So, Lama Yav Shalem Shu Yispar Bli Bracha, K'moshe Yikra Megillah Bli Bracha. I think the answer to that is, if I've understood the question correctly, is that because Sofik D'Rabbanan Lekula tells me that you are now mechuyev vadai. You're coming into a situation of being chiyuv vadai, and that chiyuv has started already. It's laila. Therefore, you have a vadai chiyuv. You're machriya. There is a hachra that it is laila, and therefore you're going to be poiter your chiyuv b'teiras vadai, and therefore, of course, you make a bracha. Masha'ikein by Megillah, you're only doing it b'teiras Sofik. And Sofik D'Rabbanan Lekula doesn't entitle you to say, because there may not be a chezkas chiyuv. That's the nafkamina. There may not be a chezkas chiyuv, I think. Anyway, that was what I wanted to share with you. Just some thoughts on Sfiras Ha'omer. There's much more to say, but I hope you enjoyed that. Thank you for joining me, and wishing you a very pleasant the rest of Yom Tov. Enjoy. Take care. Good night. Good night. Kol Tov.